Hello, everybody, and welcome to this presentation. Today's presentation will focus on the topic of risk management, or to be more accurate, project risk management. I should say first that many scholars and many practitioners believe that risk management or project risk management is the core process in managing projects, because through this process, practitioners, team members, and other people involved in the project will be able to identify dangerous or risky situations that need to be addressed either immediately or during project execution. So the objective of today's lecture is to learn more about project risk. What is it? What do you mean by project risk? And try to understand the primary causes of project risks, and learn more about the process of managing risks. You will see later that there are four important sub-processes that are needed in order to manage risks. So in this lecture, we will go through these four processes. And we will try to learn more about what are the major approaches to risk identifications and the main approaches to mitigate risks. Mitigate risks means how to reduce or eliminate these risk factors. First, the definition of project risk management. Well, there is no clear definition or agreed definition on the topic, but for instance, Pinto says that risk management is the art and science of identifying, analyzing, and responding to risk factors throughout the life of a project, and in the best interest of its objectives. Perhaps this definition shows that the process of managing risk is not really a pure science. It is also based to some extent on gut feelings, on experiences. You can't just open a book and study this book and become experienced in project risk management. This is a process that must be experienced, lived, and learned from, and perhaps after few trial and errors, you will be able to carry out this process more effectively. But the definition also says that it contains several elements. First, you have to identify, and then you have to analyze, and then you have to respond. And you do that not only once in the beginning or in the middle or at the end, no, in a continuous fashion. And all the time you keep project objectives in focus. You are analyzing risks in terms of your project objectives. And then Pinto define project risk as any possible event that can negatively affect the viability of a project. In this regard, a risk here is a threat. Anything that could happen that has a negative impact on the project. Let me also add here, it's also important to add that now we don't only think of project risks, but we think as well of project opportunities. So when we are conducting risk analysis, we conduct at the same time opportunity analysis. We are trying also to look at possible events that might have possible impact on the project. It improve performance, improve learning, improve cost performance, or any other factor that we care about in our project. So there are two sides here when we talk about project risk management actually. We talk about threats, dangerous things that could happen, as well as positive things that could happen. But of course, in many, many situations, the focus is on risk because we would like to eliminate that threat from the project. Now, there are few considerations that we have to think about when we talk about project risk management. First, project risk management is a tool, and the main objective of conducting this project risk management is actually to make your project more predictable, to be able to see in the future what will happen, what could go wrong, or what could go right. And if you are able to look, it's a picture in a way. It's a picture about future event or future situation. And if you are able to draw this picture or to make a good drawing of the project in the future, you will be able to reduce the uncertainty in your planning. You will be more certain, you will be more sure about your estimation, for instance, your scope, the problems that could arise. Therefore, we say that project risk management is a form of proactive management, not reactive management. Reactive means you sit and wait for problems to arise and then you respond to them. And this could be fair if you are unable to define risks upfront. But proactive management, you are at the forefront. You think before you act. And just to remember, risk management, there is a lot of uncertainties in the process itself. It has many limitations. As I said, your objective or the team's objective is to draw a picture of what could go wrong, but you are not sure that you draw the right picture. You might have drawn the wrong picture, or the picture you draw is not efficient or is not sufficient. So there are many limitations. But the most important outcome from conducting risk management is learning. Because when you want to draw this picture, what do you need? You need to collect information. You need to collect data. You need to check with your subcontractors, with your team members, with the owners, with everybody. Are we on the right track? Is this is the right picture we are drawing here? So it is a lot of learning that implied or embedded in this risk management process. So in principle, you can conduct risk management like forever before you start the project. But the main rule says that stop when you are not able to learn new things. So when you feel that you have learned enough, then you can stop the risk management process and proceed with other various activities. I just want to clarify one thing. Risk management as a process is not very new. We do risk management every day. Before you come to the office, before I hold a lecture, before you go to your university, you one way or another conduct this form of managing risks. What could go wrong? Simplest example, before you go to school or you go to the university, you evaluate how much time you need. And maybe you add 5 minutes or 10 minutes extra in order to be prepared for various forms of events that could happen on the way. Once I was watching a TV program on the Norwegian Broadcasting Channel, NRK, and they were broadcasting a program about a Norwegian explorer called Roald Amundsen. And you know, Roald Amundsen in 1911, he managed to reach the South Pole. And it was dangerous expedition, never was done before, successfully at least. And during this show, Roald Amundsen was, or they were citing from Roald Amundsen memoir. And he wrote something like this, which caught my attention actually. He said that it is not just the money that ensures victory in such a long expedition. Indeed, any project, any task, you need resources. So you must have enough resources. They are good to have. What really matters is how the expedition is equipped with right resources, so the relevance of these resources. And now it comes. How all the challenges are identified in advance. So this is actually what he says here before you do anything, something new, something challenging, that you have to think about what could go wrong in advance. And you have to use time on that. And then he says further, and the means to mitigate or eliminate these challenges are implemented. This is the second phase of the process. You identify the challenges, and probably you have to select which one is most key, is most difficult or most challenging or has greatest impact on your journey. And then you define response strategy in order to mitigate means reduce or eliminate these challenges. And then he says victory awaits those who has everything in order. Luck, they call it. And this is very interesting. Actually, in order to have a good luck, you must conduct a good risk management. That's what they say. There is no luck just by chance. There is work behind this luck. And according to Roald Amundsen, he says it is doing that, doing risk management in the proper way. And says further, defeat is definitely due for those who do not take the necessary actions in time. And this is also interesting. This is actually what we call now project control. It is not enough that you just define challenges and define measures, but you have to identify them and apply them at the right time. It means that you must have a process, you must have a system, a framework of how you do that. It's called bad luck. So if you are unable to introduce or use these processes that is described in this simple statement, then you will definitely be defeated or lose, or it will have negative consequences. So I thought this is very interesting citation from Roald Amundsen, because here he described actually the four processes needed in order to uh, conduct good risk management. So what are these processes though, according to Roald Amundsen and according now to established project management literature? First, first factor or the first process is risk identification. You have to identify the challenges, the difficulties. Uh, Any task, any enterprise you want to start, you must think of what can go wrong or what can go good, the threats and opportunity. Any event or any factor that contribute to that, you must try to think about it. This is called the risk identification. And of course, when we do this process of risk identification, we get a huge list of things that can go wrong or can go good. But are they important? There are a few things that has no relevance for your project, even if they go, even if they happen. They are not relevant for your project, or they don't have impact on your project. Then you must carry out some process or some work in order to assess and prioritize these risks. This process, we call it risk assessment and prioritization. In this process, you simply are considering the consequences and probabilities. How likely it is that this risk will happen, and what is the impact of that risk or this opportunity. The third process here is risk response planning, which means that you, for these factors that you thought are important, are difficult, are have great consequences, have great impact, then you must do something about it. In this risk response planning, you specify what you will be doing for each task or for each risk. And then during the project, you must monitor. You must monitor the threats, you must monitor the consequences, and you must implement the response measures at the right time. And be aware that new risk factor will emerge, and some risk factors will never happen, and some measures will not give you the intended outcome, and maybe you have to change the measures you have selected. So as you can see, risk management is continuous process with the project objectives in focus. Risk identification is perhaps the most difficult one. There are, as I said at the beginning, it requires both art and science. It's science in the sense that there are established risk factors. You can go always to previous databases and find relevant risk factors. But it's art because it's based on experience. You need to have experience. Therefore, when you are carrying this risk identification, you must base the method or the risk identification process on multiple tasks or multiple methods. For instance, talk with people with experience. Use your own previous experience from previous projects. You could interview experienced project managers. You can consult other people who have experience, like consulting company. There are many consulting companies that are specialized in risk management. They come and do the task for you. And if you have the time or if you have the experience, you can carry out some sort of brainstorming, sitting together and think about risks and what will happen and the sources of these risks. Most important that this process should be carried out using different methods, not only one method. There are some rules when you are carrying out this risk identification. Most importantly, according to project literature, is to get your people involved in the project, involved in this process. The main reason is to create ownership, because during this risk identification, you are concerned about the things that others are worried about. There are many stakeholders in your project, and each one of them is worried about something, feel that something might go wrong, and this will expose their interest or reduce or harm their interest in the project. So a good way to start is to involve various stakeholders. And as I said, because it's art and science, you must have people with the right experience in your group. You can't go to a textbook and find these risk factors listed there. And most importantly is to understand your project context, objectives, constraints. Every risk factor you identify must have relevance for your project objectives and constraints. Just a simple example. If in your project objective, it is very important that you innovate, meaning that Actually, cost and time are not important. The most important thing is to come with something unique. Then it is perhaps not very wise to just look at risk factors that could affect time or duration or cost structure in your project. You would be more concerned about finding risk factors that uh, make it difficult for you to achieve this level of innovation. So, knowing your context, knowing your objectives, knowing your requirement is a must before you start the risk identification process. Know your context, know your constraints, know your objectives. Who are they? The people who are your stakeholders. Who are they? Where are they? The product complexity, the organizational complexity. You learn about these things. And then you will be able to define risks. Now, there has been many attempts to categorize risk factors to facilitate, like Pinto again says, well, you can look for financial risk, you can look for technical risk, you can look for contractual risk, you can look for commercial risk, and you can look for execution risks. For instance, execution risk, like when you are performing, when you are doing your project, location itself could be the source of risks. Like it's not accessible, it's far away. Then you need some sort of transport equipment in order to carry out to building material and so on. The force majeures, like anything could happen. It could the weather could go sour. It could strike, for instance. Changing of rules and regulations could affect your project. On the financial part, like most of companies who want to who start development projects, housing development projects, they need to sell before they can start a project. So there is some sort of financial risk. How many are we able to sell before actually we can start the building project? Most of the companies, they have this goal. They should sell at least 80% of their prospect before they can actually start the building. So there is some risk element here. What will happen with the rest of the 20%? How much time we need to really sell the 80% of our prospect before we can start the construction, in addition to tons of technical risk and commercial risk and so on. This is a fine categorization and it is a valid categorization, but it lacks one thing if you look here very carefully: the people. Where is the people risk? Of course, people risk is implied in each one of these elements, but people are not really shown here very, very clearly. Therefore, and based on the information we gained from the cases in this book, we proposed a different categorization of sources of risk. And this categorization is based on four categories. There is risk factors are related to the product or the technology used in order to produce your project. Every project has a product at the end. This product would be a report, a concept, a component, a bicycle, a house, whatever. There is a product. And in order to produce this product, you need some sort of equipment, technology, a process, and so on. So this is the very first group of risk factors, factors related to the product or technology. For instance, under this category, we can talk about factors related to the existing infrastructure. If you want to build a road, for instance, or a complex, to a housing complex, the first thing you think of is, do we have enough infrastructure that will support this new product or this complex? If there's no infrastructure, then you might need to have this infrastructure. You can think also of ripple effects. Any product you produce, any system, any process you produce, it has side effects. It will go and change things in the environment. It will impact the environment. How our product will impact the environment? I could tell you one interesting story. A few years ago here in Trondheim, the municipality decided to upgrade a historical building near the harbor. And they decided to build a museum on the top of this historical building. It is called Rock Museum. And one of the things they decided to do in this rock museum is to put some sort of lightning on the top of the building, 14,000 bulbs. And they were able to control these bulbs. So they can change the colors, they can change the configuration, they can make some exciting things in the skies, in the dark skies of Trondheim at night. So it looked very beautiful when they finished from this project, and especially at night in the winter time, it looks beautiful. But look what happens. After some time, the aviation authorities in Norway, the airport here in Norway is not very far away. It's like 30 kilometers away. So the airport authority or aviation authorities, they notice there is a lot of noises, communication noises happens in near the airport, and they couldn't know where is the source of these noises. And these noises sometimes were so high that they interfere with the communication between the tower and the incoming flights. And in some situations, they have to send these planes back because of high level of noise. And then they studied the matter, and they discovered that the source of these communication noises comes from these 14,000 bulbs when they were on. And then the Post and Teletilsina here in Norway decided turn off the light. So actually, the Rock Museum stayed like 3-4 years. They couldn't use these wonderful lamps on top because they had impact, and they impacted the telecommunication system of the incoming flight. And they were able to use it after the Post and Teletilsina changed some communication protocol, upgraded some system, then they were able to use that. My point here is that any product you produce has an impact, and you want to know what is the impact of this product so that you can use it. There is no point in using like several million kroner on a lightning system that nobody sees. And of course, there are risks associated with requirement, risk associated with technical risks. I think those of you who have studied construction engineering or civil engineering or highway engineering or ships engineering knows that there are a lot of problems, technical problems, structural integrity, security, usability, availability, and all these things must be studied in advance. When you make a structure, you must make sure that it will stand the test of time. It will not collapse on its inhabitants. So these things must be analyzed. This is one source of risk. Another source of risk could be the people themselves. In any project, it's not the robots who are working on a project, it's people. People can say they don't want to work anymore, they can withdraw. Suddenly you are out of resources. People sometimes doesn't have enough competence, people sometimes doesn't have enough motivation, they are not available all the time. Some people resist changes, resist extra work. There are people you need their approval. There are people must be loyal to the decisions made in your project. So there are many sources of these risks. So one way you can go and look at each category of these four categories. What could go wrong with the product? Organizational structure. Do we have conflicts with other projects? Do we have conflict with the regular operational tasks? Are we sharing information the right way? People, competence, motivation, availability, resistance, approval. And then you have the context, which is, as you know, this is execution risks, soil condition, weather conditions, political factors, regulation, permits, force majeures. Now we come to the second sub process. We said the first sub process is the identification. Now assume that you manage to identify several risks, and then we can ask, are they equally important? Some of them, I'm sure, easy to manage. We don't really need to think too much about it. Here comes this risk assessment and prioritization. In order to do this risk assessment and prioritization, we have two dimensions that we usually look at. The first dimension is the probability that the risk will take place, the event will take place. And the second dimension is the consequence. What will happen? Here, consequence in the sense that some factors will have consequence on cost, some other factors will have consequence on time, or anything that is of concern here in your project. So we divide, one way to do it is to divide this dimension consequence, as you can see, into three categories. You have small consequence, you have a medium consequence, and you have a large consequence, which means that this event, if it happens, it might have small consequence on time or cost or anything, or medium or large. At the same time, the probability dimension, you can divide it also in three clusters. Low probability, almost seldom happens. Medium, yes, it happens from time to time. And then at the end, you have this high probability. Now, suddenly you got a 3 by 3 matrix. And in this 3 by 3 matrix, you can divide it into three regions. These three regions, we call them the severity of risk or risk impact. I made some classification, as you can see in this diagram here, and you could see that, for instance, the risks that have high probability and medium or large consequence, we call them, as you can see, critical risks. So critical risk factors are risk factors that have high probability and medium or large consequence. And then we have this diagonal here in the yellow color. The diagonal here, we call this group of risks significant risks. They are important risks. You need to do something about them because they either have high probability or medium probability and medium consequence, or low probability mean large consequence. And then we have this green zone. In this green zone, we call it the marginal, or don't really bother too much. They don't have a huge impact on your project because they either have small or medium combined with low and medium probability. Then all of a sudden, what we can do here is to put all our risk factors within these boxes. And needless to say, the risk factors that fall into this red zone, they are critical. Now we know what are the critical risk factors. And the risk factors that falls along this diagonal line, the yellow line or orange line, is significant or are significant risk factor. We need to address them. They are harsh, but not critical. And then you have this green zone, which says that they are marginal risk factors. So using this matrix, and this matrix is called the risk matrix or risk impact matrix, is a good tool to show what risks that are important and what risks that are not that important. Sometimes, just for simplicity, we use just 2 by 2 matrix, just to show the point here. And again, you have the critical, the red one is the critical, the yellow one is the significant, and the green one is the marginal uh, risk factor. The size of your risk matrix could be 9 by 9, 7 by 7, 6 by 6. It depends on how thorough you want to be in risk analysis. Many applications, they start with 3 by 3, and then when they study this 3 by 3 matrix, they enlarge it to maybe 5 by 5 matrix. And use this as a base for further analysis. It doesn't really matter the size, the most important is where you put your things here. Now, providing that we have put everything in place, all the risk factors, they are in their places, and now we ask the questions: what shall we do? What shall we do? How can we mitigate? Or what kind of measures we can use in order to mitigate these risks. There are 4 known mitigation strategies. Mitigation strategies, that means that general rules for how you deal with your risks. First mitigation rule is to accept it, means do nothing about it. Second mitigation rule is to minimize. What you minimize? You minimize the consequence, or you minimize the probability, because every risk has a probability or it has a consequence. So what you minimize, either this or that or both. Sometimes you are not able to minimize anything. You can share the risk with someone. You get somebody to do the work with you so that you can share the risk, but of course you have to pay for that. And at the end, you could transfer this risk, meaning that somebody else will take responsibility of that risk. This is the principle of outsourcing, contracting. Contracting actually is a tool to transfer risk. You get a contractor who you think have the competence and ability to do this job, and you say to this contractor, I will give you an extra amount of money so that you take the risk. So contracting in principle is a tool to allocate risks. Another way to transfer risk is actually to make insurance. That's a legal way to transfer risk. If something happened, you drive the car, something happened with this car, the insurance company pay. That's a way to transfer risk, but then you have to pay a premium in order to transfer risk. So the first 2, they cost less, the last 2, they cost more. And of course, there is the option that you give up. If you say that project, it is too costly to transfer, there is nothing I can accept, I cannot minimize anything, I don't have the competence to share, I am not able to do it. That's the like last option. You can say that's too big, too huge, I'm not able to do that. The mitigation strategies themselves can follow the risk categories. Like a product, how do we make a mitigation strategy like in real life? Well, we can have backup solution or parallel solution. What is the purpose of having a backup solution or parallel solution? This is to minimize risks. If you have a backup solution, then you minimizing the consequences. If the system break down, then you have a backup system that can takes over, so the consequences will be small. You have parallel solutions, perhaps you are reducing the probability that something happen with your system. If some fail, the other will take over. You can have a pilot. That's in order to reduce, to learn more about your project so that you can reduce the probability. You can involve end users, involve them even more so that you minimize changes to scope and requirements. Like in the context, as I said, you can draw an insurance with an insurance company. Then you are reducing, or actually not reducing, but you are transferring risks to this insurance company. If you do like in order to check the soil, if you do soil investigation, you are reducing the probability, perhaps, or learning more about the probability that things could happen, and you know exactly what you can do in order to tackle this type of source conditions. On the organizational side, if you try to inform, make assessment in advance, establish more templates, establish more checklists, all these factors or all these measures, they can either minimize risks or transfer risks or share risks with others. So the mitigation strategy depends on which type of uh, risk group you are dealing with. But in general, these mitigation strategies are there to accept, to reduce or minimize, share or transfer. And in the worst case scenario, give it up. But if you give it up, what will happen? You are losing the opportunities the project is providing to you. The last component in risk management is the last process, sorry, is the risk monitoring. And for this purpose, we use a risk register. A risk register is simply a document, a huge document that contains information about risk factors, each risk factor, responsible person for the management of risk. Each risk somebody must do it. And of course, there you can talk about the probability, it is high, low, or medium. And there you can put information about consequences in terms of time, cost, quality, and any other conditions. And the product of probability and consequence gives us the impact. And of course, there you can define the impact, critical, significant, or marginal, and what are the measures that you can use here, and when these measures can be used, and the status of each risk factor. So this is your documentation of the three previous processes that we have spoken about. And it looks something like that. Just to document, and this must be updated frequently during the project life cycle. Now we take a break and then we continue after the break by an example.